Thank you very much. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the first joint webinar on language education and gender, sponsored by the Central Luzon State University in Nueva Ecija, Philippines, and the Ganesha University of Education in Bali, Indonesia. Of course, this is through the initiative of the International Affairs Unit of the CLSU College of Education and Undixa's English Language Education Department in cooperation with the CLSU International Affairs Office and the Undixa's Agency of Cooperation and Public Relations. So I am Dr. Emil Ubaldo of the Central Zone State University, and together with Ms. Putu Ayu Prabhawati Sudana, we'll be serving as your moderators of this webinar. So to our participants from Indonesia, we greet you, Selamat Pagi, and Rahajeng Semeng. To our participants from the Philippines, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. To our participants from Pakistan, we greet you, Suba Bakr. And to our participants from Thailand, we greet you, Sawadi Ton Chow. So this webinar is being streamed live on Ganesha University of Education's YouTube and Facebook accounts, and at the official Facebook account of the CLSU International Affairs Office. Hence, those who might have missed the webinar can still view it on these platforms. May we remind everyone that in order to receive a certificate of participation, you would need to answer an evaluation form. So please watch out for the evaluation link to be distributed toward the end of the webinar across our webinar platforms. So prior to COVID-19 pandemic, CLSU and Indixa were partner schools in the implementation of the C Teacher Project of the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, or CMAO. And this webinar is actually one of the first initiatives in the pipeline as we work on ensuring the continuity of our partnership during and beyond COVID-19. So we have two featured speakers today, one from CLSU and one from Undiksha. And right after their talks, the audience will have the chance to ask questions for 10 minutes. So you can type your questions on Zoom chat or through the social media platforms where we are currently streaming live. And from the Central Luzon State University, we are glad today that we are joined by our officials, headed by our university president, Professor Dr. Edgar A. Orden, our vice president for academic affairs and concurrent director of the International Affairs Office, Professor Dr. Renato G. Reyes, and the dean of the College of Education, Associate Professor Dr. Regidor G. Gaboy. We also have in attendance the heads of the departments of elementary education, secondary education, advanced studies and education, Center for Educational Resources and Development Services, as well as the heads of the linkages and intercultural exchanges unit of the International Affairs Office and the International Mobility Unit. Ms. Prabha, can you please introduce the officials joining us from Ganesha University of Education?
Thank you, Dr. Ubaldo. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. From Undiksha, we are pleased that we are joined by our Vice Dean for Academic Affairs of Faculty and Languages and Arts, Dewa Putu Ramendra, Head of Agency of Cooperation and Public Relations of Ganesha University of Education, Dr. Windu Kesiman, Head of the Collaboration Unit of the Faculty of Languages and Arts, Dr. Swartini, Head of Foreign Language Department, Dr. Eka Sulis, Head of English Language Education Study Program, Ms. Dia Surya, and all faculty and students of Foreign Language Department. Thank you, Dr. Ubaldo.
Thank you, Ms. Prabha. And now to formally start the program, we'll be playing the national anthems of the Republic of the Philippines and the Republic of Indonesia, respectively. Mr. Yuda, Are we ready to play the national anthems?
Yes, we are, Dr. Ubaldo.
Mga kababayan,
Mr. Yuda,
ang pambansang
you're ready to play the national anthem? Mr. Yuda? Do we have a technical problem? Our apologies. It looks like we're having some technical problem. Yes, Prabha?
Dr. Ubaldo, I'd like to apologize. It seems that we have some technical problems here.
So we're playing the anthems from the start? Once we were ready?
We will try to play the anthem from the start. Just a
Okay.
moment. Yeah, just a moment, Dr. Ubaldo.
Okay, all right. We're waiting. So the video of the Philippine National Anthem actually shows the technology generated by Central Luzon State University, as well as our other landmarks within the campus. Are we now ready to play the national anthem? So while we're waiting for the national anthems, you can use our chat box to communicate with each other. We have a lot of messages here from our friends from Undiksha and CLSU.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, elas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibig mo'y bumay. Upang binirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng bagaw, ay yunatang tulakaw, sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang patawad mo'y tagumpay na nagiging, mapituwin at parang yakainan, ang kailang higingin. Lumanang araw ng warhagin pagsika, mo'y langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya na partay magagi, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Miss Prabha?
Thank you very much for the national anthem for the Philippines and Indonesia. We apologize for technical problems that we encountered just now. Ladies and gentlemen, respected colleagues from Central Luzon State University, Undiksha, all participants. Now we'd like to invite an opening remark from Vice Dean for Academic Affairs of Faculty of Languages and Arts, Ganesha University of Education, Dr. Dewaputu Ramendra. Dr. Dewaputu Ramendra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Prabha, for the time given for me to have some speech. Good morning, all. Om Swastiastu. My Honorable, the University President of Central Luzon State University, Professor Dr. Eja A. Orden, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Concurrent Director of the International Affairs Office, Professor Dr. Renato G. Reyes, Dean of the College Education, Associate Professor Dr. Regider Geboy, Heads of the Department of Elementary Education, Professor Viola Barnasi, Head of the Secondary Education Department, Dr. Emily Astrero, Head of the Advanced Studies and Education Department, Dr. Lorente Ibarra, Head of Center for Educational Resource and Development Service, Dr. Joel Torres, Head of the Linkage and Intercultural Exchange Unit of the International Affairs Office, Dr. Parson Hale, and the Head of the International Mobility Unit, Dr. Emil Ubaldo, and all other respected colleagues from CLSU. Also, Head of the Agency of Cooperation and Public Relations from Undiksa, Bapak Made Windu Antara Kasiman, PhD, Head of Foreign Language Department, Ibu Dr. Eka Sulistya Dewi, and Head of the English Language Education Department, Ibu Diah. The honorable presenters of today's seminar, Dr. Joel M. Torres, Associate Professor, Department of Secondary Education, College of Education, CLSU, Philippines, and Professor Dr. Ninyoman Padmadewi, MA, from Universitas Pendidikan Ganesha, Singaraja. The committee who has worked very hard to make this event realized, and all the participants of this webinar. Thank you all for being here to attend this webinar. In this pandemic situation, most things are difficult to do, and our education system has received a massive challenge. For more than a year, we have to study at home, and work in quite isolated places. The students are not going to campus, and the students and student teachers meeting were not as what they were used to be. In this sense, face-to-face encounters are very limited. This all certainly can make our spirits down. So in a situation such as this, it is really important that we do creative and enlightening academic activities like this webinar to keep our spirit up and at the same time develop our academic competence. We are really happy to have this collaborative webinar event, a joint project from Central Luzon State University and Universitas Pendidikan Ganesha. We actually have conducted some collaborative and joint activity from before. For example, like students exchange program. So in 2019, 9 students from Undiksa went to CLSU to study for some time. And we also received 2 students from CLSU to take a program here in Undiksa. This exchange program was a good one and was very successful. So we are all waiting and look forward that we can have more joint programs and collaboration for our mutual benefits. The topic of this webinar is very interesting, and in my opinion, give answers towards one of the challenges and trends of the 21st century education, that is equality and access to education. In this sense, Dr. Joel M. Torres discusses about English and Englishes in relation to responsive and inclusive pedagogy. And Professor Dr. Ninyoman Padmadewi, MA, share about gender construction in society. So I'm sure that all participants are enthusiastic and cannot wait to listen to these two presenters and as well as presentation. Thank you very much to the University President and all our respected colleagues of CLSU who have helped make this project possible. Director of Undixa and all our respected colleagues in Undixa as well. And not to be forgotten, the committee who has planned and worked since day one, and all participants who attend this webinar. Thank you. Om Santi 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 Om.
Thank you, Dr. Ramendra, for that opening remarks. At this point in time, we will hear the opening remarks or another opening remarks from the trailblazer and visionary president of the Central Luzon State University. Please welcome Professor Dr. Edgar A. Orden. Sir?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Obaldo. Warm greetings from Central Luzon State University. So a pleasant morning to the rector of Undixa, Professor Dr. Newman Jampel, to the Vice Rector of Undixa for Education and Affairs, Dr. G.D. Rasben Dantes, good day. And of course to Professor Dr. Dewa Puta Ramendra, good morning, sir. And of course to the other administrators from Undixa and participants from your institution. And of course, I would like to greet a pleasant morning to the hardworking Vice President of the Academic Affairs of CLSU and concurrently the Director of the International Affairs Office, Dr. Renato G. Reyes, and of course to the Dean of the College of Education, Dr. Reggie Gaboy, and to all the faculty of the College of Education, students, guests, and participants of this webinar. A wonderful day to everyone. The partnership that CLSU and the Ganesha University is indeed a testament of solid commitment of both institutions to advance education to its clientele. We remain committed to promote access to higher education, trainings, and opportunities for our students, faculty, and relevant stakeholders, thereby producing socially responsible educators of the future. The success of this webinar partnership has rested on sustained academic engagement and activities between CLSU and Ganesha. This webinar on language education and gender provides an opportunity for faculty members, students, to share new knowledge, innovative and relevant teaching methods, research ideas, and experiences in this virtual platform. It also encourages transdisciplinary studies in language and promote greater integration of gender-inclusive teaching methods through this strategic collaboration between CLSU and Ganesha University. I congratulate both institutions for their continued excellent service to our students and to the faculty members. I encourage everyone to continue taking part in the fulfillment of our goals to mold the next generation of dedicated and socially responsible educators. Before I end my talk, I would like to thank our speakers, of course, from CLSU, Dr. Joel M. Torres, and from Undiksha, Professor Dr. Newman Padwadewi. So thank you very much for your contribution to the success of this webinar series. Thank you very much and mabuhay.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we will hear an inspirational message from the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the concurrent director of the CLSU International Affairs Office. Please welcome Professor Dr. Renato G. Reyes, sir.
My warmest morning greetings to our CLSU President, University Professor Dr. Edgar Alcantara Orden, the Rector of Ondicia, Professor Dr. Nioman Hampel, the Vice Rector of Ondicia for Education and Affairs, Dr. Gede Ras Bendantes, Dr. Dewa Putu Ramendra, the Dean of the College of Education of the Central Luzon State University, Dr. Hidor Gaboy, the Head of the International Linkages of CLSU International Affairs Office, Dr. Parsons Hale, the Head of the International Mobility of CLSU International Affairs Office, Dr. Emil Obaldo. Our featured speakers this morning, Associate Professor Dr. Joel Torres and Professor Dr. Nioman Padwadewi. Likewise, to all the faculty members, students, and other participants, a wonderful morning to all of you. Central Luzon State University, through its College of Education and Ganesha University of Education in Bali, Indonesia, remain excellent partners in promoting academic exchange in education, research, and culture. Today's webinar is a manifestation of a resilient and strong bilateral relationship towards advancing quality education of both higher education institutions, thus contributing to socially responsible future educators of the world. Today's webinar on language, education, and gender is specifically dwelling on the topics recognizing language varieties toward a more responsive and inclusive pedagogy, promotes the importance of language varieties that would create positive impact to learners, which is an integral element of quality education. While the topic gender construction in society, language perspective will promote gender-sensitive language learning, which is important in advancing gender equality in education and in all forms. Let us all take part in the realization of our goals and objectives as educators of the next generation and generations to come. To ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities, and at the same time achieving gender equality and empower all women and girls. CLSU and Ganesha University are one with this fundamental goal. Terima kasih and mabuhay.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Reyes. Ms. Prabha?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Orden and Professor Reyes. Indeed, inspirational messages that you have delivered. Thank you so much. Terima kasih. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to our main agenda, can we have photo session just for 1 minute as we have everybody complete here? And can I have your videos on for a moment? Okay, I will start to take the pictures. Okay, so many participants. I need to take pictures of lots of slides then. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our respected colleagues from CLSU and Undiksha, all participants. Now we will move to our main agenda, and the first speaker is Associate Professor Dr. Joel M. Torres. He will talk about English or Englishes, recognizing language varieties toward a more responsive and inclusive pedagogy. Let me read his amazing bio note first. Dr. Joel Mayo Torres is an Associate Professor 3 at the Department of Secondary Education of the College of Education, Central Luzon State University. He obtained a Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English with cum laude from CLSU and Master of Arts in English major in Applied Linguistics from Nueva Ecija University of Science and Technology. He completed Doctor of Philosophy in Applied Linguistics at De La Salle University as a scholar of the CHED K-12 Transition Program Scholarship Grant. Since 2010, he has published research articles on the fields of social linguistics, discourse analysis, language and culture, Philippine English and second language acquisition, learning and pedagogy in Scopus indexed, internationally referred and institution-based journals. In 2015, he was the recipient of the Outstanding Young Novo Echijano or Young Professional category for his exceptional display of skills, knowledge, and perseverance in achieving greater heights of achievement for the province of Nueva Ecija. Very impressive. He was the former chair of the Secondary Education Department of College of Education and Director of the Expanded Tertiary Education Equivalency and Accreditation Program at CLSU. And at present, he is the head of the Center for Educational Resources Development and Services and an accreditor of the accrediting agency of the Chart Colleges and Universities of the Philippines as well. So Dr. Torres, you will share your expertise and experience on the topic for 40 minutes. And after that, we will have a question and answer session for 10 minutes. And for those who would like to ask questions, we welcome you to write in the chat in this Zoom meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Dr. Torres, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. Once again, good day, everyone from across the globe, especially to our officials, faculty members, and students of Central Luzon State University and Ganesha University of Education. Am I coming clear to your end? Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. So, of course, we appreciate your time shared to us. This collaboration is indeed a manifestation of the cordial bilateral relationship that we have shared in the kinship of spirit of kinship. Being neighboring countries, we have a lot of semblances, both cultural and geographical, and we hope that this kind of collaboration really continues. And as we quest for internationalization, it is fitting and proper that we do acknowledge the varieties of language that everyone brings. So the topic that I will be sharing this morning is not actually relatively new as far as literature is concerned, but this is something that is yet to be well promoted. So this topic would reach a wider sphere of influence, exposure, and in a meaningful sense of accessibility. So let me share my screen. So can you, okay, wait, I'll be sharing my screen, but I can. Can you now see my screen?
Yes, Dr. Torres. Very clear.
Okay, so there's no doubt that English is the most global of all languages. It is the lingua franca of business, of science, education, politics, and even of pop culture. However, the term English is not a monolith term, but rather each a catch-all term or a catch-all word for all the varieties of English that one speaks. It is in the form of linguistic and it's functional. The variety of English that we speak is the product of our rich cultural, geographical, cultural, and political background. Hence, the topic, English or Englishes, recognizing language varieties toward a more responsive and inclusive pedagogy. This lecture will begin in the discussion of two of the most important concepts in social linguistics. The first one is the concept of language content, and another is the language varieties. Then these two concepts will be related to the world English's paradigm. After those two concepts and the relationship are actually established, we will now move to the brief presentation of the WE or the World English's phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. Then how we're going to see the implications of these in our education or in our respective pedagogy. The highlight of this presentation will be on the importance of accepting language varieties in one's instruction so that we are to ensure the success of teaching and the learning process. So as we begin, I would like first to have a very quick review of the bigger concepts that will help us trace the path toward world Englishes. So we will be reviewing very quick the concepts of linguistics, applied linguistics, social linguistics, language contact, language varieties. Then we are to underscore our topic, which is world Englishes. So let's go for the first one, linguistics. This is, of course, the science of language. Linguistics encompasses the every aspect of a language, as well as the methods for studying and coming up with the model of the languages spoken all over the world. Linguistics involves analysis of the language form, language meaning, and language in context. It also tackles the analysis of the social, cultural, historical, and the political factors that influence language change. Language is never static and it changes along with the changes that happens in the society. Now let's move to the concept of applied linguistics. Applied linguistics is an interdisciplinary field which identifies, investigates, and offers solutions to language-related problems. There are a lot of disciplines that are related to applied linguistics. This could be education, psychology, communication research, anthropology, and sociology. Whenever there is a language, there's always applied linguistics. And last is social linguistics. Social linguistics is the aspect of language that is applied toward the connection between language and society and the way we use it in different situations. Since we are the users of a particular language, the way we use it would differ. It depends on the context where we are. It depends on the people we're dealing with. It depends on the level of formality that is expected for us at that particular moment. Social linguistics is the descriptive study on the effect of any and all aspects of society. That's why we also discuss how culture, how gender, how socioeconomic status would affect one's language. Now, let's go to the difference between language and dialect. So is there really a difference between these two? For instance, in Indonesia, they say that they have 700 languages. So how about dialect? So when we talk about language, this is really different from what we call a dialect, because language is the method of human communication, either in a spoken or written way. It consists of using words in a structured and conventional way. Dialect, on the other hand, is a variety of a language. This is distinguished by grammar, by pronunciation, or vocabulary is spoken by a specific area or the people in that particular area. For instance, in the Philippines, Tagalog is a language, but the Tagalog is spoken by the ones from Nueva Ecija would be different from the Tagalog is spoken by the one from Bulacan, by the one from Batangas, or the one from Bataan. So those varieties within a language are called dialects. So let's take a closer look on the difference between language and dialect. So we say here that language is a method of human communication, either spoken or written. It is actually used in a structured and conventional way. While dialect, this is specific to a particular social or ethnic groups, but it's still coming from that kind of language. That is just like a strand or a brand or a kind of language. Then this can be categorized into two main parts. We have the spoken language and the written language. Meanwhile, dialect is into two main parts: the standard dialects and the non-standard dialects, or the one that has not yet been widely used, or there are only limited people who have been using this kind of variety in that language. And another distinction between language and dialect is that we say that languages of the same language family are not mutually intelligible. Meaning, for instance, our language, Bahasa Indonesia and Tagalog, is part of the Austronesian language family. But there are aspects in which we do not understand. That's part of the language. But when we say dialect, dialects of the same language are often mutually intelligible. Say, for example, the Tagalog and its varieties could be still understood by those who are speaking Tagalog, the language. So to illustrate this, here is our for the language family. We have here the Austronesian language family, where Tagalog and the Malay are actually from the Malayo-Polynesian, specifically the Western Malayo-Polynesian. We belong to the same language family. However, we do not necessarily understand each other. But in the dialect, coming from a same language family, it is mutually intelligible. So that is what we say when we are talking about intelligibility of the dialect compared to intelligibility of a language coming from the same language family. So now let's proceed to language contact. So language contact happens when two or more languages are spoken in the same or adjoining regions, and when there is a high degree of communication between the people speaking them. Since we are the ones carrying the language wherever we go, there's a tendency that when we bring the kind of language we speak to a certain area in which there's another language being spoken, the tendency is there's kind of mix up. So that is when language contact happens. So we kind of use the kind of language that we have and use it in a place where there is another language being spoken. So what could be the result of language contact? It could result in language loss or language death. This happens when the kind of language you bring into a certain place carries more prestige than the ones you happen to see at that or to hear at that particular area. Or it could also result in bi or multilingualism, in which you teach them their language and you learn the language. And the last is language change. Here, we say that since due to language contact, that's the time in which the languages adapt to each other. So, as we say, according to Thomas M. Cochran in 1988, he mentioned that all languages in the world are actually products of language contact. Such phenomenon is indeed inevitable, and it's quite normal, given that languages, as I said earlier, are dependent to the speakers, to the people, and the social creatures involved in the dynamic relationship. So since we bring in that kind of language contact is always a part of our communication. Hence, language change is visible due to language contact. And let us now take a look at the different varieties of language, starting off with the more permanent one to the more transient one. So let's go to idiolect. This is one of the factors that contribute to the variety of language. For instance, idiolect, when we talk about idiolect, every person has a unique way of expressing himself or herself. We get to hear a person talking the same way, playing with the words the same way, coming up with phrases when they write on the same manner. Idiolect is a very significant aspect, specifically in forensic linguistics, in which they were able to trace those people responsible for a certain action due to the patterns of his speech he has either in written or in spoken form. So there's this particular series in Netflix, the Manhunt, Unabomber, in which forensic linguistics plays a very crucial role in tracking down who was the bomber that is based on his written discourse. So we also notice that among ourselves, that whenever we speak, we frame the words or we draft the words, we play with the words the same way. And next is the dialect. As part of the varieties of language, dialect is distinguished by grammar, by pronunciation, or vocabulary spoken in a specific area or by that of a certain group. This is specifically in the, as what Lawab said, that we have our different pronunciation, we have our different accent. And this is really true because the kind of the pronunciation we have, the kind of diction and accent we have are actually products of our background and product of our mother tongue as well. Then we have a more permanent transient one. We have register. When we talk of register in the social linguistics aspect, this actually refers to the use of language for a particular purpose. It could be static, it could be formal, it could be consultative, it could be casual or intimate. It depends on the particular situation where we at and the kind of language we bring it depending on the need at that particular moment. Then we also have something related to it is the styles, which is our mode of saying or expressing the same message. This happens especially when we have a very important message that we have to really deliver, and styles of delivering this message would differ from one person to another. How do we send in the message would actually be different from one person to another. And the last part of the variety is on the modes. It could be verbal or written. So because of this language content, language varieties, many nowadays own English. Many users of English take ownership of the language. And the tendency is that if you take ownership of the language, you become, you have that particular feeling that you are free to do some modifications out of the language because you already own it. You already embrace it. And what could be the result of that would be you have that particular leeway for you to do some modifications based on, first, based on what you are aware of, based on what you are familiar of, or based on your history or background. English is genuinely a global language. And because English is a global language, many people tend to use it, and they come up with the process of what we call appropriation, as I said earlier, taking something as one's own, ownership, and abrogation, which is they tend to come up with some deviations in the use of the language. Sometimes they could not look for a perfect word to explain a certain phenomenon. Then the thing is they create their own. So this actually, the process of appropriation and abrogation in the formerly colonized societies of Great Britain and the United States resulted in the discerning of the imperial norms of the English language. And this process gave birth to the indigenized varieties of English. And these have become the proud bearers of what we call world Englishes. This WE paradigm, or the world Englishes paradigm, was first articulated by a linguist, Braj Kachru, in 1984. So what did he notice was that he wrote a journal article in 1984 entitled The Indianness in Indian English, meaning he found that as they use English, as Indians use English, there are those unique terms, there are those phrases, there are those language structures that are only found among Indian speakers of English or Indian writers of English. That particular article lays down the theoretical groundwork for the idea of world Englishes. So the world Englishes model accounts for the way language is now used by millions of multilinguals taking ownership of English and changing it to reflect their own lives. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we could not find a term for it in English, then we just tend to borrow from our mother tongue or mother language. Then little by little, it enters the English vocabulary. And that's when we say a product of the or a result in the indigenized variety of English. So the difference between the two, when we say world English and world Englishes, are they different? When we talk about world English, it refers to the English language as lingua franca used in business, in trade, diplomacy, and other spheres of global activity. The world English is the one we use in IELTS. The world English is the one we use in licensure examinations. The world English is the one we use in formal documents. But when we talk about world Englishes, it refers to the different varieties of English and English-based creoles developed in the different regions of the world. as I mentioned earlier, because we take ownership of the language, we become free to do some modifications based on our end. So because of this, Abraj Kachru introduced the concentric circles. He has the inner circle, the outer circle, and the expanding circle. So the inner circle is also known as the norm-providing countries. Why they are norm-providing? Because they are basically the native speakers of the language. Countries such as USA, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. English is used as their primary language because they have been using the language for for a longer period of time compared to those in the outer circle. They consider themselves as the norm providing. Then the ones who are from the outer circle, they are considered the norm developing. These are the countries where English usage has some colonial history. So as you can see, most of the countries, Philippines is included in the outer circle, these countries have been once a colony of those in the inner circle. Being colonized by those in the inner circle for some period of time, they had exposure, direct exposure to the native speakers way back then, and that enables them to master the language and eventually come up with their norms in speaking the language and develop how the language is being spoken on their end. That's why that gave birth to Philippine English, Singlish, Pakistan English, and Indian English, among others. Then the last in the circle is the expanding circle. Countries such as Indonesia, China, Egypt, Korea, and the like are actually part of the expanding circle. So expanding circle are norm dependent. These include countries where English is spoken, but it does not necessarily have a colonial history. Okay, so in these countries, English is regularly spoken for international and for business. According to Kachru, it's important to view these concentric circles or the countries within these concentric circles in their own historical, political, as well as social linguistics and literary context. So Kachru also argues that English language belongs not only to the native speakers, but also to the various non-native speakers with their own brand, with their own variety of English. So world Englishes, we will have a rundown of world Englishes in terms of phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. That's why we say sometimes we speak the same English, but when we talk to the Native Americans and the native speakers, there tend to be instances in which we do not understand them in the same way that they do not understand us, because again, that is the result of those varieties. So let's talk about world Englishes in terms of these four aspects: phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. So as you can see here, we're just talking about the inner circle. There differs the way they pronounce a certain word. Okay, so sometimes in the Philippines, we get to ask, what is the correct pronunciation for this? How do you really enunciate this? And even the language experts would give you different ways of pronouncing it because it depends on what kind of English do they follow. As you can see clearly here in our screen, there are differences. Say, for example, the word fleece could be fleece or fleece, or the word kit could be kit. It could be short, or in the South Africa, cat. Okay, so but referring to the same word kit. And for example, dress, and the UK English is dress, Australia, dress, but in Jamaican English, it's dress. Okay, so you see the differences. And Philippine English, our parent English is American English. So most of the time, we go to the general American way. But in instances in which we hear some deviations, then sometimes it becomes a matter of concern. But what we're telling now is that we have different ways, really, of saying it. It depends on which framework or which English are you following. Another one is on spelling. Say, for example, for US, Canada, UK, and Australia, you will see the word color for with an OR. For Canada, you have OUR. The same is for the center, okay? For the United States, you have CENTER. For the Canada, UK, and Australia variety, they have the RE. The same is true with the globalization, the word realize with an S and with a Z. Another one is the defense with an S or the C, traveling with a double L. So all these are products of varieties. Sometimes it creates confusion among learners of English. Another one is when they say program with an M on the end and program with an ME on the end. So they are just actually the same. These are the UK variety and the other one is the US variety. Next is, another one is, this is a quick reference chart on the difference when it comes to spelling. You have here the ENSE and the ENCE for defense, license, and practice. The ER versus RE. We also have the OR versus OUR. Even the double L, the spelling also varies. It depends on the kind of English we are referring to. Next is, even in meanings or even in morphology still, when you talk about eggplant, it's different in the UK English. When you talk about elevator in American English, you call it lift. Apartment, you call it flat. Okay, you call fruit pie, you call it flan in the UK English. So even within, what we're trying to say here is that even within the inner circle, there are varieties, there are differences. For example, you call someone who in the hotel reception, you call that reception in the UK. In the American English, you call that someone in the front desk. Or jug and pitcher, tin or can. All of these are actual examples of the differences on phology. And next is British English versus American English. So the use of preposition. For instance, in the British English, they say, I talk to Jane. But in the American English, they would say, I talk with Jane. Or the use of to versus through, the prepositions at and on, the prepositions for and in. This is specifically problematic for Filipino speakers or Filipino users of the English language because we have very limited preposition in the Filipino language, unlike in English, in which there are a lot of prepositions available. So we get confused on which preposition do we actually have to use. Next is, another one is here. You will see that in UK, class, which is a collective noun, is considered as plural, but most of the time in the Australia and in the USA English, they consider it as singular. Even in the conjugations of the verbs, you would see that there are also differences on the different varieties of English. So I learned it in the American English, I learned it for the UK and in the Australian English. In the USA, you say, I'd forgotten, I forgot for the Australian and the UK English. Now, do we just really come up with those listing? Do we just say that, oh, these should be included in the World English as paradigm? whenever you come up with a new word and it's not part of the dictionary, especially of the American English dictionaries, then you get to say, should I include this in the World English's paradigm? Should this be really part of the varieties of English? There are what we call bases on listing or determining which should be included in the particular varieties or in their in the list. So such, as we say, such deviations or variations do not occur in terms of word choice only, because there are sociolinguistics contexts, such as the range of functional domains and who are the ones speaking this one. So that's why they differentiate mistake versus and deviation. So mistake is when we say the usages point to any deficiency in acquiring the language, while deviation are those that are usages of English which are different from inner circle usages. So inside the classroom, when we tend to hear our students speaking the kind of English he has with him and he carries inside the classroom, these are basically part of the way they speak and what we say that they frequently use it inside the classroom, then we should be very careful in labeling this as either a mistake or a deviation. De Souza, in Bautista 1999, provided us criteria on how to standardize the new varieties of English. There are questions such as, is it widespread? When you say widespread, is it used in a number of domains? Do we see this in the media? Do we see this in newspaper? Do we see this or do we hear this in formal speeches? Is it systematic? Is the way that they actually arrive at this kind of variety of English, is there a sound theoretical background or sound rules that are basis of these varieties? Another one, is it rule governed? Say, for example, sometimes we overgeneralize the use of plural forms, that we apply it even that's not the way how we pluralize the noun. So is it based on those particular rules? Or another criteria is that we consider a new variety of English when it is used by competent speakers in formal situations. Whenever we get to hear those people in the academy using this variety or this kind of deviation, then much so that this could, in a way, be part of the new varieties of English if this is frequently used by competent speakers in informal situations. So, for example, in meeting, in speeches, in addresses, and the like. So, likewise, Platt and Weber, as well as Hall, provided a criteria that validates a variety of English as a new English. Still, this is in Bautista 1999. According to them, it is considered a new variety of English if it has developed through the educational system. Again, if it is used by the people in the academy, frequently used by the people in the academy, then it could be considered. And it is used for a range of functions or a bigger sphere or domain. It has developed in an area where a native variety of English was not the language spoken by most of the population. For example, it's only in this particular place where, especially, there are no native speakers in that area, and they keep on nurturing, cultivating that particular variety. Then that's the time when we consider it as a new variety of English, and it has become nativized or localized. Now, we'll talk about very quickly on Philippine English as part of the one that is within the outer circle. Remember Cacherou's concentric circle? We have the inner circle, the outer circle, and the expanding circle. Now we'll try to look at the Philippine English, which is a really flourishing variety of English. According to Brother Andrew Gonzalez in 1997, Filipinos learned English from Filipinos, and seeds of what we call Philippine English began because history tells us that our first teachers in the Philippines were the Thomasites, but after the times of the Thomasites, the teachers became the native Filipinos, and that's where we learned the kind of English we have today. So Philippine English is not the same as the Carabao English that we say. Philippine English is the one is spoken by the people in the academy, by the educated people, and the one who really have knowledge on the language. So it's really different from the Carabao English that we say. So according to Liamzon Gonzalez Bautista, Philippine English is a unique brand of English used by the vast majority of educated Filipinos and apparent in various forms of mass media, print or non-print, literary or non-literary. This is something that we really see, or something that is widespread in all those domains. So it's not only something that is used by a certain person, but it has reached a wider audience. According to Borlongan in 2011, Philippine English does follow American English, undeniably a child of its parent. But like a typical child of any parent, it has a life of its own too. One sees traits inherited from the parent, but likewise, it manifests traits resulting from developmental and contextual dynamics. So this goes to say that even in the Philippines, the kind of English that we speak is most likely the American English, but still, like a child, it develops its own traits. It has its own characteristics, maybe a way or similar to the parents, which is American English. So even according to the Oxford English Dictionary editor, Dr. Danica Salazar, she claims that Philippine English is a legitimate variety. And there are a lot of Filipino words that now have entered the Oxford English Dictionary. So here are some of the studies in Philippine English. So we have studies on phonology, in which they describe how the different speakers, lectal speakers, use English. So they group, Liamzon group speakers into acrolect, mesolect, and basilect. Beroa also did a more recent study. We also did a study on that, the most recent one. Then Dr. Tish Bautista in 2004 studied the attitudes toward Philippine English. Tupas did a study on what varieties of English are actually accepted in the education, in the media, or in just informal discourse. Borlongan and Dita did the study of verbs in Philippine English. Dita also studied semantics of Philippine English. Comprehensibility, intelligibility of Philippine English was done by De Leon and Dita in 2007. Intelligibility meaning is the kind of English spoken by Filipinos intelligible to other speakers. Next, Martin, Bernardo, and Madruño did the pedagogical acceptability. We also did in 2019 acceptability of grammatical and lexical items. The more recent one, we also identified where is Philippine English in the different discourse quadrants. Say, for example, in quadrant 1, which is informal spoken, quadrant 2, informal spoken plus formal spoken, quadrant 3, quadrant 4, and so on. So we look at the place of Philippine English, where is it actually used and could be accepted. Also, if we're gonna look at this one on the phonology of Philippine English, it could be different in a way for the American English. Say, for example, the short I, the A and the A, the U and the U, the O and the O, okay? Because this could be product of the fact that in the Philippines, we only have the Filipino language only has 5 vowel sounds, unlike in English, in which they have 13 vowel sounds. So it differs here. Say, for example, sometimes you say meat or meat, or sometimes the MEAT and the MEET is pronounced the same. But the American English framework would tell us that someone is longer and someone is shorter. The same is true with the boat and the bought. But sometimes we enunciate it in the same manner because, again, this is a reflection of the Filipino language, in which we only have only 5 vowel sounds in the Filipino language. Another one is even on the stress. The way we put it stress, sometimes we say ceremony in Philippine English, condolence, utensil, orator, contribute. But in the American English, we'll say ceremony, condolence, utensil, orator, contribute, semester. So sometimes this actually also creates confusion. So inside the classroom, we really have to tell our students that this is the stress this is where you place a stress when you are referring to the American English. But most Filipinos would put it on the other syllable, unlike how the American speakers would place the stress on a certain syllable. Another one is we have here sample of Philippine English lexicons. We have here chancing, eat all you can, which is actually in the American English, this is all you can eat. Live in, bed space or bed spacer, double deck, comfort room, vulcanizing shop, videoke. These are those that have already entered the Oxford English Dictionary and have been acknowledged as a new variety of English, specifically Philippine English. Another one is traffic. Traffic, for instance, is if you look at the definition in English, in the American English, it's actually noun. But in the Philippines, we use it as an adjective to describe a certain situation, like a traffic jam. But basically, traffic is a noun, but it has that particular lexical shift in which it has been used in another way or in another lexical category to describe a specific situation. We also have dirty ice cream, barkada, and the like. So these are sample of the Philippine English lexicon. Now we also have English words with alternative meanings in the Philippines. Say, for example, when we talk about napkin, napkin is actually a small piece of cloth that we use when we dine in. But when we usually dine in and use to clean our lips or after we have our meals. But in the Philippines, it could have an alternative meaning, which refers to a sanitary pad. You also have maniac. Maniac is someone who is violent and mentally ill, but in the Philippines, it takes a brand new form or meaning, or somebody who is pervert. Another one is tomboy. Tomboy is, in the American English, if you look at it, the meaning of it is a girl who enjoys activities that are typically for the boys. But in the Philippines, tomboy came up with a different meaning, alternative meaning, which is lesbian. Another one is cowboy. Cowboy is, of course, in the American English, it's a man who rides in a horse. But in the Philippine English, cowboy is somebody who is not picky or he's not fussy. Okay, so he's not maarte, something like that. So these are some of the English words with alternative meaning in the Philippines. So Gustilo, Tocalo, and Kalingasan in 2019 also come up with an inventory of the Internet Philippine English. Basically, these are the ones seen in the net, and say, for example, in news items and some blogs, you can see these ones. Say, for example, we have here Fitspirations, Retokada, Fangirling, Romcoms, Generation Olds, Ates. These are now considered as Internet Philippine English. We also see this when they post on the Facebook, or when they comment, or when they write their blogs, or even some articles, news articles, commentaries. These are present. Now, this is the difference when it comes to phrases. Phrases that are distinct to Philippine English. Say, for example, in the American English, we have to say fill out, but in the Philippine English, we most likely say fill up. In the American English, we say result in. In the Philippine English, we say result to. American English, based on. In the Philippine English, we say based from. We also have here the difference on the use of from and for. From your perspective or for your perspective. Then fill in the blank in the American English, fill the blank in search of, in search for. Another one is cope with. In the Philippine English, we say cope up with. So with regard in the American English, and in the Philippine English, with regards. Okay. Another one that is very distinct characteristic of Philippine English is the use of were in. If you look at the word were in, it's not present in the American English dictionary, but most of us use this one to replace the phrase in which. Okay, so I tried to look at the net and try to see Indonesian English, Indonesian, they say. So here are some Indonesian expressions that little by little could be considered a variety of Indonesian English. This is from the study of Demi, Winiharti, and Prawati in 2018. So Indonesian expression would be developer and developer in the English expression. Enjoy your day, make the spirit. And crispy, body treatment, powerful for power, column, and the like. So if you try to search the net, there are limited studies on the description of Indonesian English. So it's really high time to really, for us to explore this aspect on the characteristics, the listing, the inventory of Indonesian English could be in the morphology of Indonesian English could also be explored in the future. So now, the most important question is, how can our knowledge of word Englishes help us come up with a more responsive and inclusive pedagogy? So with all this, we already say that this variety should be acknowledged, this should be embraced, but how does this actually affect our respective pedagogies? So what do we do now as educators, and for those who are watching us as future educators, what do we do now with this knowledge that there is really the existence of these varieties? So do we just acknowledge them, or do we actually bring this practice inside our classrooms? So according to Quinton in 2013, we should be responsive so that we assure that there is inclusivity inside our classroom. And to do that, we have to have our culturally responsive pedagogy. It starts with the premise that race and class matter. To make sure that all students feel valued, the theory goes, teachers need to be aware of their own biases, work deeply to understand their individual learners, find ways to bring students' heritage and community into the classroom. What does it say? We really have to be acknowledging of the kind of English that our students bring inside the classroom. Because the tendency is that if we become so focused or so strict on the paradigm that only the American English way or only the kind that of English that American speakers do speak will be accepted in the classroom, then the tendency is that we'll limit the tendency or the chance of our students to grow. We limit their opportunity to explore more of our topics, because the language per se is already problematic, because they are afraid to talk. They are anxious to share what they have in their mind, because they might be afraid of being, what do you call this? Being belittled, or being like something that there would be discrimination when they speak not so good English. But the thing is, at first, we really have to be acknowledging and embracing of all the varieties they bring, because at the end of the day, these varieties would be the ones that will help them to learn more about the kind of English we want them to learn. Another thing is that as educators, we must distinguish between the informal and formal varieties in an objective way, and must accept the learner's variety as a valid form of communication. Say, for example, in recitation. If it's not in written form, then we just have to let our students feel free to express themselves, whether they group for words, whether it would be hard for them to coin that particular word that they're gonna say at that particular moment. Let's just help them. Be there to guide them to be there to provide a safe, welcoming, and acknowledging environment to them. And of course, as educators, we have to contrast the use of different varieties. Like what we found in our study, that the varieties of English can only be accepted as of the moment in some of domains. Say, for example, they are allowed to speak the varieties of English they have with them in informal spoken, meaning when they do talk with their group mates or their classmates, or when they are outside the classroom, then the varieties could be accepted. Or informal spoken could be, or informal written, or informal written. Say, for example, of course, when they write their manuscripts, of course, there's a certain standard that we are to follow. So they should be acquainted with those varieties. Another thing is that educators should get a healthy dose of social linguistics, transformational grammar, and the history of English. With this, we become aware of where English is coming from. We become aware of language construct, become varieties, become aware of differences on the way people use language. Then this awareness will turn into a certain kind of what? A level of acceptance, a level of accommodation that we give to our students. Another thing, as Baron lays down, trust our language instinct rather than mimicking some ideals which turn out to be a moving target. Language is dynamic, so we can never master it, no matter how we want. But rather, we have to abandon the 18th century prescriptions behind. That's why even in English language teaching paradigm, we no longer say prescriptive grammar rather than descriptive grammar. Another thing is aim for language that is simply good enough to do the job of expressing whatever it is we need to say. And another thing is that when we study language, we should study what it is and not what someone thinks it should be.
Dr. Torres, sorry to interrupt. I'd like to
Yes.
inform about the time.
Yes.
Can you finish in 2 minutes, please?
Yes. Okay. I'll try to wrap up. Okay. Grammatical system of a language should be described on the basis of what people actually say, not what the idealized norm dictates. So it's high time for us to really describe what is going on with our language, especially in the Indonesian context. It's important that we have to come up with a description, with a documentation of the kind of English is spoken in Indonesia. Because in the Philippines, there are a lot of studies that have been done so far, but we still need more studies. In the Indonesian context, we still need to come up with those descriptions and documentation. Another thing, as what Demi, Winnie Harty, and Prawati mentioned in 2018, non-standard English expression should become the start in planning to educate society. So with us acknowledging English or Englishes, definitely it's Englishes. We have to recognize that there's a presence of these varieties and appreciate the kind of English that our students bring. Acknowledge in most domains so that we can help our students to become more productive, more expressive, and become better achievers inside our classroom. And of course, we have to respect, because the kind of English they bring inside the classroom, the kind of language they carry on inside the classroom are actually products of their culture. If we don't respect that, then we do not say respect their culture. So it's now time to say, sorry for my bad English. We don't have to say that, because the kind of English you speak, again, is a reflection of your rich political, geographical, and cultural heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Torres. I see a few questions from the audience. Just a moment, I'll read the first one. Could accent, from Richard G. Babas, could accent be a base to differentiate two dialects? Would you like to answer it right away, Dr. Torres?
Say, for example, differences in accent, but you're talking about the same language is a part of dialect, yes. Say, for example, you talk about English. Say, for example, one would say civilization, the other one would say civilization. So it could be the way we speak it, the way we pronounce it could already be a variety or a dialect of it.
Okay. All right, that is answered already. Now, I can see there is a Paksiri Tongsen is asking for your opinion, your point of view. I think this can relate to Schneider's dynamic model. Philippine English seems to have reached phase 3, nativization, but I'm not sure if it is moving towards phase 4, endonormative stabilization. I would appreciate your point of view on this issue.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for that question. There's an article of Berlongan that would say that Philippine English is already moving to the endonormative model. But still, we need more people who would actually attest to this and a bigger use of this language. And this particular Philippine English should be still seen in the formal written context. Say, for example, there are those Philippine English varieties that have entered the formal written context, such as theses and manuscripts. Other formal academic records could also attest that there are also Philippine English that have entered those. But again, we still need more of those words or those varieties of those kinds to really say that it has already entered the endonormative phase. Thank you, sir, for that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
I hope I answered the question. Yeah, it's good that you pointed out the Schneider's model.
Okay, thank you very much for those participants who asked questions already. Thank you very much, Dr. Torres, especially on the practical tips that you put on the last part on the slide of what we have to do as teachers to embrace the different varieties that students may have with themselves in class. Thank you very much. Now, the second talk will be led by Dr. Ubaldo. Dr. Ubaldo?
Thank you, Ms. Prabha and Dr. Torres. Now, it's time for our second featured speaker. So she is a lecturer at the English Education Department of Ganesha University of Education, where she heads the postgraduate program in English language education. She finished her master's degree from Macquarie University in Australia and her doctorate degree from Udayana University in Indonesia. As a scholar in the field of English language education, she frequently presents papers in conferences and serves as reviewers of different internationally peer-reviewed journals. In addition, she has also designed curricula for students with special needs. She is also the founder of several schools with international networks and an international foundation on humanitarian and social work supported by sponsors all over the world. So please welcome Professor Dr. Ninyoman Padmadewi to share her expertise on the topic Gender Construction in Society, a Language Perspective. Dr. Padmadewi?
Thank you so much, Dr. Emil, for the introductions about me. Okay, good morning, everyone. Greetings from Ganesha University Education, Universitas Pendidikan Ganesha in Bali. I'm a great honor to be here, to be invited as one of the speakers to share knowledge and also ideas about language and gender. Allow me to share the screen. Do you think that, okay. Okay, do you see the screen, all of you?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. My topic is about gender construction in society, and I see it from language perspective. My scope of presentation will be divided into 3 parts. The first part is about definitions of gender. What is gender about? And the second one will be about theories of language and gender. And the last one will be sharing about research on language and gender. Concept of gender will be viewed from theory of gender, and gender equality will be viewed from conflict theory and also function theory. And gender differences, which is reflected in the area of linguistics and languages, will be viewed from the theory of language and gender. And we will support a discussion by referring to several research on language and gender. Right, we start with the difference between sex and gender. Sometimes students confused about this. What is actually gender? What is actually sex? Because some students confuse whether it is sex or it is gender. Well, sex is understood as a kind of biological differences between men and women. It is prenatal construction. People will know whether the baby is a boy or baby is a girl even before they are delivered. So it is constructed during prenatal, period. It is, of course, having a kind of biological differences where male, for example, has certain characteristics and also female have certain biological differences which are different from male. While gender, the concept of gender is constructed by the society. So it is postnatal construction, socially and culturally constructed. Say, for example, when we are in a family, we often heard people say like this, oh, you girls don't play about that toys that's supposed to be for men or for boys. Or sometimes the boys will be like this, why you are playing that one? That toy is for girls. So the environment actually constructed the concept, this is for men and this is for girls. So that's why, because of this one, we find differences. Feminine is related sometimes with graceful and soft. Masculine is related with strong, for example. So those differences are formulated and reconfirmed by social construction. Right. Biological differences, unfortunately, often lead to gender differences that women traditionally assume to be a housewife because they have to breastfeed the children and raise them, while men, because of their strong muscle, generally considered to be stronger. Because of these differences, and then job description are often created differently. Say, for example, if you are in the classroom and then you are needed to move a table, for example, and naturally boys are expected to take part on that kind of action. And then say, for example, if the boys are just quiet and the girls are moving the table and people is say like this, hey, you girls, let the boys do that. Or the boys, where you are quiet, it must be you who do that. Or that comment are often stated, or we often heard things like that, which differentiate. This is men's job, this is women's job. Okay. In line with this, Kian 2015 stated that the partial side of the two brain hemispheres of many women is quite different in the development speed and level of specialization. Women's left hemisphere on sexual partial side of sexual function is earlier and stronger than men. So they are better than men in terms of language expression and short-term memory. Men, on the other hand, develop the right hemisphere, so they are better than women in spatial perception, analysis, comprehensive ability, and experimental observation. Gender differences is actually common and no problem if it does not lead into gender inequality or inequality. Gender inequality can be seen in the situation where we find out marginalization of women, for example, subordinations, for example, discrimination or negative labels, or many more, which disadvantage women. Manifestations of gender inequality and inequality is frequently confirmed by social system and tradition. In the world of patriarchy, generally speaking, men is superior and men are inferior. Right, in order to explore more about that concept, I would like to share the theory pertaining to gender and language and gender. I start the explanation later by exploring or reviewing gender theory. And after that, we discuss about functional theory and conflict theory. And after that, we will share information about language and gender theory to discuss about how gender differences also bring about differences in terms of language. Right. Gender theory is so popular and it is used a lot in psychology. And there are three parts of gender theory which are good to be used to support the gender differences in society. The nature theory, nurture theory, interaction of nature, and nature theory. The nature versus nurture debate involved the extent to which particular aspects of behavior are a product of either inherited, genetic, or acquired or learned influences. Nature theory believes that the differences, psychological differences between men and women is because of their biological factors. So women are weaker than men because they have smaller muscle than men. So this is more related to genetic differences, which I talked before as biological differences. How, because of the differences in terms of their biological characteristic, then bring about differences. The next one is nurture theory, which is related to the theory that I mentioned before, that the environment take part in constructing the concept of gender. Psychological differences between men and women is formed by the environment and socialized by adults. Many cases, we find out that, say, for example, a man is climbing a tree. That is the tradition that we often find out in society. Then if, for example, we see that the women is climbing a tree, then people will comment on that. Look at that, right? It's supposed to be done by men. So people consider that as a weird thing. Why? Because the tradition has been socialized by the environment that climbing a tree is usually done by men. So nature theory believe in this one. But sometimes the nature theory and nurture theory cannot explain the phenomena. So that's why interaction of nurture and nature theory is coming up. So psychological differences between men and women happen because of the interaction between biological factors and at the same time also socio-cultural factors. So both have contribution in building the concept of gender in society. Med, a very well-known sociologist, mentioned that three elements which contribute to the development of gender identity. The first one is genetic factor, which I already explained before. And the second one is effort done by the other members of society to shape somebody with the culture they consider appropriate. The learning process of imitating done simultaneously by others with other persons. So I think what are the elements stated by Med are very in line with what I explained before. It depends on how other people dictate the tradition, and also because of the differences in terms of genetic factor that cannot be denied. So because of that, it is very important to consider these differences. The next theory, which also important to be looked at in order to explain about gender, is functional theory. This is based on how men and women have the function at their role in society. So it is stated that society during industry time, in this period, in this era, we often find out that men and women have different roles. Women deals with domestic domain and men deals with public affairs. And job description made women dependent on men, which lead to men dominating women. Even though then, because of the development of the culture, development of the, the situation, the technology that we have, and then this kind of theory is not entirely supported by experts because it is not always suitable with the situation of some countries. We often see that in some cultures and also some countries that even women can be considered as the breadwinner because they have more opportunity compared with the men, and the men can be just stay at home. So it depends on the situation and the culture of the people. The next one, which is also related, is the theory of conflict theory. This is usually related with the gender equality and also gender equality. Conflict theory, based on Hayes 2020, consider that conflict theory holds that social order is maintained by domination and power rather than by consensus and conformity. And this is also supported by Mark concept, which stated that gender inequality is rooted from economic imbalance between men and women. Economic benefit can lead to power and prestige. Men who have high economic power tend to have superior social status in society, which can lead to dominance of men on women. But further development shows that both theories are acceptable. They admitted that gender inequality is more because of social factors and biological differences. The next one, which is really important in dealing with the language, is the theory of language and gender. This theory is really in line with the theories that I mentioned before, but this is specifically focused and discussing more on how language difference between men and women, and it is related with the gender theory that I explained before. I.M. is the one who introduced about this theory. There are 3 theories which can be used as a reference for discussing about language and gender. The first one is man dominance theory. The second one, gender role socialization theory. And the last one is appropriate register theory. Let me explain about this one by one. Men's dominant theory. In this theory, it is believed that utterance of men and women is the reflection of patriarchy world. The dominations of men over women is reflected in the languages they express. The men are considered to be the dominant group and they keep their control and superiority. There are lots of examples about this one, which reflecting that how men dominance actually reflected in language. For example, we often heard that people say like this: men discovered America, for example. Men are used in order to refer to human being, or other words like policemen. The policemen are there. Policemen for showing about a job. And we find out that lately there are a lot of police women. So then the job as policemen and then substituted into police officer. So the word officer is considered to be more neutral compared with policemen. And there are others also example which we find out how dominance of men are also indicated in language. Just this kind of caricature, I like it so much, so I use it here as a kind of example. This is, as you can see in your screen, a young boy is asking something to a man, a father here. I took it somewhere, the internet, and look at the, what is it? What they said, meaning of motherland, son, the kind of which is your mother's to work on and your father's to own. From this expression, you can see that how they consider the position of men and women, even though it is only a kind of caricature, only meme, but then it is reflecting in the past how man domination plays important role in creating the words or in using or in expressing the ideas in society. Okay. In men's demand theory also, I mentioned there are types of linguistic dominance which can be seen. Say, for example, interrupting other talks, pause for a long time, right? Controlling the conversation, forcing people to choose the topic of conversation, and also refusing to be cooperative in developing a topic and spotted by other speakers. And sometimes we also see that sarcastic linguistically and other example. Interruption, for example, we often see that in a conversation, a man is sometimes interrupting other people in the conversation. And there are many examples of this one, but of course, there are many factors influence the use of that linguistic strategy. Right, in the past, this kind of theory, men's dominance theory, had many followers. Despite many followers, men dominance theory was then left. There are many, example, which give a reasons why the theory is left by people. The decision was made just because linguistic features to claim about dominance and obedience. I'll give you example. Silence is stated as a kind of showing power, but many times we find out that silence is frequently interpreted as powerless. However, silence can be very powerful. Let me give you example. The conversation, for example, between a wife and her husband. A wife say like this, "Can I go out, use this car?" And the man look at her and then silent, didn't say anything. And then after that, the wife decided not to use the car. From that example that I can give you, it is a kind of indicator that from the context, we know that being silent is not always showing a kind of powerless, but it can be also to show a kind of power. The same with interruption. Interrupting can be done, like before it was mentioned that it is showing a kind of dominant. In many cases might be yes, but in other cases, sometimes it's not always appropriate. Why? Because interrupting not always indicating dominance, but it can be meant or as reflecting cooperativeness and supporting the conversation or too enthusiastic to involve in the conversation. I give you example. Interruption, in what way do you think that it can be used to show about, it can be interpreted as showing dominant? In what way it can be used that it is indicating that interrupting is a kind of supporting or to reflect cooperativeness? If interruption, say for example, you talk to another person in a group of several people, and you as a man, for example, is interrupting the conversation that is happening at that time. And then you can see that the other participants in that group suddenly silent and then all listen to you. And then without you realize, you change the topic of the conversation. Before they talk about topic A, because of your interruption, the topic of conversation become following the topic that you address. In that case, of course, interruption is a dominant. Why? Because the conversation become imbalanced. You are the one who control the conversation now, and the followers of the group your group then just silent following your topic of discussion. In that case, interruption is a power, showing dominant. But sometimes interruption is not showing dominance all the time. Sometimes in a conversation, we see that people interrupting, but then in the interruption conducted by people, they are not changing the topic, but they are supporting the topic which was just discussed. So in that case, we can see that interruption sometimes is conducted to show cooperativeness. That person is supporting what was discussed in the conversation before, or in other words, we can say that that participant is too enthusiastic to involve the conversation. So in this case, we can say that interruption is not always the same with power and dominance. So the context is playing an important role in this case. So because of this, then man dominance theory is not always enough to explain the phenomena of conversation, which reflect the differences between men and women. For that reason, the next theory that is introduced by IM is gender role socialization theory. It is related to the previous theory of gender, nurture theory. This theory claims that the difference of men and women in their utterance is because of the socialization process they experience. In line with this, Tennant 1990 also say that men and women are raised in different culture, which contribute to gender differences in language. So children learn about attitude, linguistic behavior from how adults treat them. So socialization is seen as a way how the difference of men and women is understood, then actualized as the men are dominant and women subordinate. There are many examples about this, which might differ from one culture to the next culture. But in a culture of patriarchy, it is very clear and obvious that men are considered to be superior. So then it is also reflected in linguistic. Say, for example, if a man is considered to be giving, instruction, command using direct instruction, for example, it is very considered to be, common. But sometimes interaction between men and women is not always, dictated by that one. The context also plays important role. So that's why the next theory is introduced, appropriate register theory. There are many experts who are, in line with this one. And Fishman consider that we need to consider the situation itself, like I told you before, to explain the linguistic behavior before we explain how the speaker experience the gender role socialization. The next one is Mols and Boca. The language differences of men and women is because of the cultural factor. Tennant 1990 emphasized the cultural difference which underline the language difference between men and women. IM herself mentioned that the role of the context of conversation used by the speaker has more important rules than gender. So we often find out that we have to consider where it happens and how it happens. And we take into consideration the context and the situation, how the conversation is, is taking place. But there are many examples of data that clarify and also reconfirm that men and women are different, even though what makes them different because of many factors. There are many research about this one, which we will discuss later, but I would like to give you example how that the conversation between men and women can take place, and then we can see that the intentions is also reflecting their position in the conversation. Let me give you one example. A man can say like this, take that shoes for me, please. I'm in a hurry, right? Take that, I repeat once again, take that shoes, please. I'm in a hurry. That is how a man giving instruction to the partner in a house, how the women can help him to take his shoes because he is in a hurry. Now look at how the same expression can be used by a woman, but the intention, but the meaning is a bit different. For example, take that shoes, please. My leg is very painful. We can see that the two men and women are using the same expression, the same command. Take that shoes, please, for me. The man, but the reason is different. The man is saying, I am in a hurry. So from this command, we can see that he asked somebody to do something for him for the benefit of his intention. Why? Because he is in a hurry. He wants somebody to do something for him, for his benefit. But look at the example provided by a woman in the expression where she says like this, take that shoes, please. My leg is very painful. So he is asking to give any command because he cannot do something to help herself because her leg is very painful. So he is asking somebody or a man to do that because she is herself cannot do that. So it's not reflecting dominant, even though, for example, the expression is, asking, command. Right, that is some example. So it depends on the culture, the situation, the context, how the conversation is happening. It's also how we are giving any interpretation to what expression used by men and women. So in appropriate registers theory, it is also reconfirmed that in one case, it is found out that those who spend a lot of time maintaining their top position in a company or organization usually develop different register. The difference of their talking style is because of the context itself, not because of being men and women. So the position sometimes making any kind of, indexicality, how they sometimes speak out different kinds of language expression. Tennant also have a kind of, research in 1990, and she mentioned that dominations and subordinations are expressed in interaction through linguistic strategies. She mentioned there are 5 linguistic strategies that are identified. The first one is indirectness, interaction, silent versus talking, topic raising, conflict, and verbal aggression. I would like to explain this one by one. So indirectness is usually understood as weak language, which is related to female speaker. The tendency of women to express something indirectly is considered as an evidence that women do not have any right to demand something. In relation to this, we can have Kennan research. It is stated that Madagascar women use more direct expression in Malagasy language compared to men. This does not mean that women have higher position than men. Socially, men have dominant position and indirectness has more prestige than direct expression. Tennant further mentioned that indirectness is difficult to be understood without cross-cultural perspective. It depends on setting, the status of the person, and the connection to each other, and also linguistic convention agreed. It is very true. I strongly believe in this one. The next one, interruption. So in line with what was explained before, Shannon also had the same opinion. It is often assumed that interruption as a form of linguistic dominance, which is often expressed by men toward women in conversation. So Tennant also explained that interruption sometimes can be understood as domination if communication is not symmetrical or balanced, but it is also can be interpreted as a sport if the communication balance, like I told you before, the example that I gave from the data that I have. The next linguistic strategy which differentiate men and women can be seen from the concept of silent versus talking. Silent is assumed to be obedient, subordinate, or powerless. Men dominate women by making them silent. It is very true in some cases. This might be right, but not universal. Silence can be very powerful. Both can be used to state power or obedience, depends on the dynamic of the conversation. Again, to see about what is the intention of having silence as linguistic strategy must be seen from how it happens, when it happens, who involved, and how was the situation when the expression are taking place. So a lot need to be considered. The next linguistic strategy also, which can be used to reflect the difference between men and women in linguistic expression, is topic raising in conversation. There is a tendency that people who frequently raise the topic of conversation seem to be dominating the conversation. However, it is not always like that. Topic raising can be done because of too long pauses in order to fill in the emptiness. Sometimes people are taking initiative to talk, not because they want to control the conversation, but because sometimes they want to fill in the emptiness. Might be pause are too long. So then somebody is taking initiative to talk in order to fill in the emptiness. So that case is sometimes happen like that. Another one, linguistic strategy mentions by Tennant is conflict versus verbal aggression. It is often found that male speakers tend to be competitive and often involved in conflict by argumentating, giving comment or disagreement with others. And female speakers tend to be cooperative and avoid conflict, for example, by agreeing, supporting, advising, not by commanding. Other examples, sometimes we find out that men like to talk in public to show their superiority, to show their quality, that they are really good speaker. But sometimes women do not really like to talk in public, but sometimes they prefer to be sharing information in the discussion. So that's why in that case, women are considered to be more cooperative. They like to share with others, but when they are invited to talk in public, then they prefer not to take part in that occasion. That happen like that. So it reflects the difference between men and women. I also did research about gender and language in 2005. In my research, I found out that women applied more flexible linguistic strategies compared with men's strategies. Women use graded strategies in order to get their intention. The men, on the other hand, are more static in choosing the linguistic strategy used. In other words, men are less flexible in shifting the strategies used and tend to focus on one particular way. What is meant by this is like this. In the conversation that I collected at that time, it is often found that if a woman wants to say something and once the intention is established, women tend to use more than one strategies. They started by the softest strategy, and if, for example, that strategy is not established, and start to have another strategy which is stronger and stronger. Men, on the other hand, they don't really use different strategies. They stick on one strategies but repeat it. But they stick on one strategy but sometimes reconfirm one more time. So that is occurring in many cases that I collected at that time. I used about 20 families, and I found out that this happened frequently in the families that I observed. So from the research that I found out, there are differences between the linguistic strategies used by men and women. That is from the respondent who have different language background. So I classify the respondent, and then I found out that different language background will give them different kind of linguistic strategies to be used. So these are the differences that I found out from the respondent who are having undergraduate, both men and women are having sarjana degree, undergrad, language background. What is interesting here is that silent is used more as powerless, subordinate in here, right? We can see that here, sarjana degree, both are sarjana, right? But then even though the women are highly educated, but it doesn't mean that he use silence as a power. Here, men use ignorant ones. Here, one of the strategies to be found. But this one, men and women, we find out that sarcastic words are used by both men and women. In this one, I found out that sarcastic words are used by women when they are in a situation of being angry, right? Interruption can be used by men and women. Asking questions for confirming. In this one, I use both by men and women. The next one is when the respondent are both from high schools education background. The difference is quite clear here, but not that obvious that both men and women use this one. Right?
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Padmadewi.
Yes.
May I just remind about the time? Could we
wrap
up in 3 to 4 minutes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Right, we can also find out different linguistic strategies which reflect the differences between men and women. Okay, what is important in here is that the difference of language of men and women is also in line with what was before found out by Lakoff as the characteristic women language. He mentions about 9 characteristics, and this is supported also by Rahmawati, a researcher from Indonesia, 2019. She confirms that what was explained by Lakoff before is also represented and also reconfirmed in her research. Right. Other research in the area of language is also conducted by my student, Artini 2020, Wiraningsi 2021. They analyze English textbook in high school. Based on the analysis, it is found out that there are language aspects which still characterizing the difference of language and gender. They found out that there are several categories, and it was found out that the language features that is found out in the textbook are associated with the deficit position of women in society, with result the representation of women has hesitation to contribute on talk, while men were depicted as more confidence. So reconfirm the previous research conducted. The other one also mentioned that Erdiana 2019, which also did research in relation to language and gender. It is concluded that First grade female student of high school understudy had better performance in speaking skill than the male student, despite the difference is trivial. Yeah, it is trivial, but it is showing differences between men and women. Other research also mentioned that women are more proficient in speaking compared with men, but men are better in the high order thinking. But of course, this kind of research need to be reconfirmed by conducting more research about it. Another research by Kian also mentioned that girls' English strategy is more conscious than that of boys. Their learning strategies include the plan and the reflection. So there are gender differences also in learning strategies. So what I can say from here is that men and women are identified to be different, which stem from biological distinction and also because of social environment. Men and women are also distinguished, indicating differences in linguistic and learning strategies. So it is critical for teachers, educators, lecturers to raise understanding about this distinction so that we can have better perception of students, so treat them better in classroom, because gender equality and gender equality can be promoted through education. Might be because of this awareness, teachers, lecturers, educators can adapt to the method of teaching, how they are aware of the differences that happening in the classroom, so that if the awareness is good, then they also are ready to modify the teaching learning process so it suits all the students in the classroom, despite the differences. Okay, I think that's all I can say. I would like to close my presentation by having this kind of work. I like it so much. Shouting about gender equality once a year doesn't end the patriarchal and misogynistic stereotype. We must live every day as Women's Day. Only then there will be actual practical equality in this world. So, Naskar. I like it so much, so I use this to close my presentation. I think that's all I can say today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Padmadewi, for that relevant talk as we move toward a more gender-inclusive society. In fact, gender equality is among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So may we just remind everybody to please fill out the evaluation form, which was sent via the Zoom chat, so that your certificate of participation will be delivered in your email. So let us now entertain questions for Dr. Padmadewi. Ma'am, we have one here from Justin Red Bersola. He's asking, I know a person who is misogynist. He always brags his gender, such as saying, we men are better than we women, even in his class. Ironically, I believe that the person has attended gender sensitivity seminar. So my question is, what other strategy can an institution or a person can do to stop this kind of bad attitude?
Can I answer that right away?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. It's a very good question. Yes, the perception about gender is coming from how you are trained, socialized from the beginning. I totally agree with the socialization theory about what I mentioned before. The way the student, the children perceive the difference between men and women depends on how adult socialized about this one. And because of this, I think what we can do is that to change their perception. Changing their perception is taking a long process. It cannot be done in a sudden, then you can change the people perception. So what is, I think, in my opinion, what can be done is that to promote gender equality and gender equality through education right from the beginning, from the child, early childhood. We can start, say, for example, by looking at the textbook, how you introduce, how you promote gender equality in For example, we used to have a textbook like this in Indonesia. My father is going to the office. My mother is cooking in the kitchen. Those are introduced in our textbook before. So with this one, it is internalized that women are always in the kitchen. Because of that, a gender awareness movement then is, is introduced through the emancipations of women as well. And we then considered how we introduce or promote gender equality more seriously. It can be done from many levels. Through education from the youngest or the lowest level of education. And also don't forget, we can involve parents about this one. Or we can also introduce through the society. Look at, for example, the TV shows, for example. How the video, the movie introduced more and more gender equality. For example, before in the past, we never see a mechanic as a woman. Mechanic is always a man in the past. Or also security is always a man in the past. But nowadays we can watch drama on TV or any movie on TV that those kind of job, which supposed to be before, was done by men only. Now more and more are introduced that those kind of job can be done by women. So what I can say as a conclusion to the answer is that all sectors must take part in this kind of awareness. Not only us as the teacher, even the teacher must be done comprehensively, consistently, and with commitment, but also parents at home, because the norms are introduced through parental, through environment at home, because students are mostly at home, and also other sectors like society. So the movement of gender awareness must be done by all people, all levels. So then bit by bit, I think that attitude can be changed slowly, but I believe this can be done slowly. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Padmadevi, for the comprehensive answer. I think, do we have questions from Facebook and YouTube? I don't see any from the Facebook page of the CLS International Affairs Office. How about from the Undiksha Facebook page? Do we have any other question, or from YouTube? Ms. Prabha,
no,
do we
Dr.
have?
Ubaldo. There is no question there. Only here in the Zoom chat.
Okay. So I think we can now proceed to the next part of the webinar. Thank you so much, Dr. Padmadevi. So now we'll proceed with the virtual awarding of the Certificate of Appreciation to our featured speakers. Can we please project the certificate? Mr. Yuda, do you have the certificate? Oh, I'm sorry. There's another question. Could we just accommodate this last question?
Okay.
From Madir Rahayu Sai. I think this would be the last question that we will address Dr. Padmadewi.
Yes.
So the question is, introducing gender equality and equity, probably, since childhood appeared as your suggestion to the problem above. I'm interested in that. I have ever listened to genderless parenting, which is not introducing gender to their children and let their children identify the gender itself. What do you think about it? So the person asking about genderless parenting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that will be a good idea, because it depends on how you, as the norm in your family, for example, need to be introduced. Even when I was in Australia a long time ago, when I studied about in 1990, I also have a kind of, gender-free languages. How you are introduced with neutral languages. There are dictionary about neutral languages. So it is a good one. So if, for example, we as parents can introduce about gender since the very beginning, And if, for example, you are using a kind of inquiry-based kind of teaching in there, where you ask your student to identify themselves, and of course, this need to be guided by teachers or by adults. So then the concept about gender is not wrong, because you ask your student to identify by themselves. Need special skill, need special competencies, and also classroom management, how this to be done appropriately. So it's good. It depends on how you manage your classroom, especially how you are able to guide your students, so the concept about gender will not be wrong. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Padmadewi. Now, can we now proceed to the awarding of the certificates? Can we project the certificate? So the first certificate of appreciation, the citation reads, Central Zone State University, Philippines, and Ganesha University of Education, Indonesia, award the certificate of appreciation to Dr. Joel M. Torres for sharing his expertise as resource person on topic English or Englishes, recognizing language varieties toward a more responsive and inclusive pedagogy during the webinar on language education and gender held on May 27, 2021. It will be signed by Professor Dr. Edgar A. Orden, President of the Central Zone State University, and Professor Dr. Inyoman Jampil, Rector of the Ganesha University of Education. Thank you so much, Dr. Torres. And then we'll move to the next certificate. So the next certificate of appreciation is awarded to Professor Dr. Ninyoman Padmadewi for sharing her expertise as a resource person on the topic Gender Construction in Society, Language Perspective during the webinar on language education and gender held on May 27, 2021. It will be signed by Professor Dr. Edgar A. Orden, President of the Central Zone State University, and Professor Dr. Inyoman Jampil, Rector of the Ganesha University of Education. Ms. Prabha?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ubaldo. We have come to the very end program of today's webinar, which is the closing remark. There will be two closing remarks. The first one is from Undiksha, and after that from CLSU. From Undiksha, I kindly invite the head of Agency of Cooperation and Public Relations of Ganesha University of Education, Dr. Windu Kesiman. Sir?
Yeah, Ms. Prabha, thank you. Okay, so thank you also for Dr. Ubaldo for this opportunity. Honorable speakers from Undiksha, Prof. Padmadewi, and from CLSU, Dr. Joel M. Torres, the honorable delegation from faculty members, international office, and committee from both university, Undiksha and CLSU, and of course, all the participants of today's webinar that I'm very proud of, the students from both university, Indonesia and the Philippines, and also maybe some students from Pakistan and Thailand. So we have reached the end of today's program. The webinar session for nearly 3 hours, of course, has brought and provided extraordinary knowledge, enrichment for all of us, to open a broader insight about the language education and gender. And we believe that this program can provide special benefit for students who are in the field of linguistics and maybe social. As addition, as we all know, this program was implemented in collaboration between CLSU and Undiksha. And hopefully this collaboration will be able to provide the added value both for the organizing committee and for the participants in enhancing the experience in international relations, which is increasingly being demanded in the 2 last decades. Undiksha has also launched our international Lessons at Home program since 2019, and CLSU is one of the foreign cooperation partners with a very close communication and relationship. So we do really hope that this implementation of collaborative program between CLSU and Undiksha can continue, and maybe can involve other potential faculties from the 2 universities. And as I represent Undixa for this closing session, and especially from the Agency of Cooperation and Public Relations, I would like to thank all colleagues from CLSU, all organizing committee from both universities, and all the participants who have participated in this activity with great enthusiasm. And hopefully everyone will always be healthy in this pandemic condition, and we can meet in person at another opportunity. And I would like also to use this opportunity to promote and invite our big next thing in Undixa. So we have international virtual summer school that will be held in July, in the end of July, for the period of 5 days. And we offer a wide range variety of knowledge from 8 different faculties or tracks. So we have also one special track for the faculty of language and art. So maybe many students from the Philippines, from Thailand, and also from Pakistan can join our summer school. And that will be 32 hours courses, so it can be recognized as a 2 credit for your university. So thank you very much for this opportunity for Undixa to collaborate with CLSU. See you next time. Thank you, Ms. Prabha and Dr. Ubaldo.
Thank you, Dr. Windu. And on the part of CLSU, the Dean of the College of Education, Dr. Regidor G. Gaboy, will deliver the closing remarks. Sir?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ubaldo. So in closing, we would like to extend our sincerest appreciation to the university officials of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, and of course to our very supportive university officials in Central Luzon State University. Thank you also very much to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Nino Man Padmadewi and Dr. Joel M. Torres. And please allow me also to recognize Dr. Madera Miningis, who one of our earlier colleagues from Undixa, together with the late Dr. Mehani under the City Teacher Project and the University to University Exchange Program. To other hardworking officials, staff, and students of Undixa and CLSU, and those who have participated in this webinar, thank you very much. We are now done with another activity for the advancement of cause in the field of education. And indeed, it shows that CLSU and Undixa are strong partners. And we hope that this webinar could further pave way to our active collaboration, especially during these trying times. We are looking forward for more meaningful activities, and let us congratulate ourselves for this worthwhile undertaking. Terima kasih, maraming salamat. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gaboy. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all our webinar. Thank you very much for being here. Terima kasih, kapkun ka, pohot sukriya, maraming salamat po. Thank you so much. See you in the next event.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.